Hi, welcome back to another episode of Title Talk, where today's topic is how to make sure your transaction is going to close when markets are moving downward in value. Hi, I'm Jim Brown, Florida real estate attorney and founder at New Path Title and James Brown Law. And every week I get realtors referring buyers and sellers to me, and we have the unique opportunity to give you guys the topics that buyers and sellers and realtors are calling us about that are relevant. And for the last, I would say, 6 weeks, we have been receiving a disproportionate number of calls from buyers who are looking to escape their transaction because they locked in a few months ago or they locked in a few weeks ago and they think they may be paying too much. And so they're looking for a way to get out of their contract. And we get calls from sellers that say the buyer retained an attorney and the buyer doesn't want to close. And so the first thing everybody does is the first thing attorneys do on behalf of their clients is they look to the contract to make sure the other side performed. So there's a lot of critical dates and there are a lot of issues that we're going to go over in a few minutes. Title Leap gives realtors all the critical dates so you don't fall behind on those issues. And we're going to talk about some of the issues that come up with regard to those critical dates. Second deposits, don't need to say a whole lot about that. Financing, 2 conditions in financing that everybody has to be aware of. Sellers, you want to make sure that buyers checking all the boxes so you have all your options open. So you have the buyer's approval contingent on the actual approval for financing and the buyer and lender having obtained the appraisal. You want to make sure that they're making application within that 5-day period. That's the default provision. And the approval that is contingent on the sale of buyer's other property is not an approval. So that's something to keep in mind. Sellers can actually cancel the contract for that reason if that approval is subject to sale of other buyer's property. Title evidence, that's a biggie. So buyers will want to cancel the contract if sellers haven't delivered their title evidence. If you look at section 9C, there's a title evidence deadline. Again, Title Leap gives you those deadlines right in the app, and you can make sure you're hitting those dates very easily and efficiently. And in Palm Beach County, that's a seller's duty. So that's the first thing the buyer is going to say is that seller didn't deliver the title insurance evidence in time. And that's a commitment and hard copies. So I've seen recently attorneys attacking sellers for not delivering the hard copies of the exceptions. Property inspections, don't need to say a whole lot about that, but Title Leap does give you the reminder. You want to be cognizant of when your inspection periods end. And if you're working in a condominium association, I'm giving you the biggies that come up all the time. If you're working in a condominium association, you want to make sure that you've given an accurate statement of the fees. And so the fees and assessments. And so there's a case called Pine Tree that allows a buyer to cancel the contract if they don't know what the fees are up until the day of closing. So we've had a couple of cases where the fees were misstated, not accurately stated in the contract, and the buyer argued that they had the opportunity to cancel the contract. And you don't want to have that. What we're trying to do is avoid unnecessary dialogue between the parties, right? So if we can nail the fees number right off the bat, it's a non-issue. If you're closer in the ballpark, you're always going to find a buyer's attorney who says they've been misled. There's also a requirement to deliver certain condominium documents. And so you have the declaration of condominium, articles of incorporation, and the bylaws, and the rules. So those are 3 separate documents: declaration of condo, the bylaws, and the rules. And then you also need to provide the most recent year-end financial information and frequently asked questions and answers. So there's a whole lot there to unpack. And the other day I saw one recently where they delivered some budgeting information, but it wasn't the most recent year-end financial information. And so the buyer's arguing that they can void the contract because they didn't get that information and they canceled within the time frame that they had to cancel. And so you want to make sure as a seller's agent And you want to make sure as a buyer's agent, you've delivered all those things so your contract is shored up. The goal is that people don't have the opportunity to cancel at the last minute. And so what happens if you do find a transaction where your buyer is, whether you're on the seller side or the buyer side, your buyer is wanting to avoid the transaction because they think that the values have gone down, but they're looking for other excuses. So what you want to do as a seller's agent is you want to make sure your sellers have given notice to the title agent and everybody in the transaction that they are ready, willing, and able to close. And you want to go through all the motions of closing. So even if your buyer is hemming and hawing, you're still contacting the title agent and you're saying, please send us closing documents and wiring information where our proceeds, you're going to send them wiring information where your proceeds are going to go. You're doing all little things to give the appearance that the seller wants to close this transaction, is willing to close this transaction, and is prepared to close this transaction. And so what you don't want to have is, after the transaction was supposed to close, the buyer saying, well, the seller wasn't ready either. So you're doing all those things. It's a little extra calorie burn, but it's going to give you the best shot at keeping the deposit and or making sure your buyer gets to the closing table. And then if they don't close, if the buyer doesn't sign on the day after the transaction, you're sending a notice of cancellation and you're telling the buyer you're going to relist the property immediately. So you've done all those things to best set up that deposit. And we can talk more about what happens if the buyer doesn't close. We have another title talk on the site where you can find out what happens when buyers don't close and what happens when sellers don't close. But for now, the goal is just shore up that transaction, put your seller in the best position to apply leverage to the buyer to make them close, or if they don't close, the best shot at the deposit. And remember, Titlely provides you all the critical dates to your phone in the app, and you can stay on top of that stuff, and your clients also get the same reminders. I hope you guys have found value in this. I really enjoy doing these things for you guys, and I look forward to doing our next title talk together. In the meantime, hope your road to closing has no potholes.